I thank you for the invitation, Max, and I hope I won't disappoint, but don't set your bar too high, folks. Which is why we've got here a little bit about printing, because it can be as long a story or as detailed a story as you want, and so we're going to skip over a few thousand years fairly quickly, if we can. So as I say here, I'm not a printer, but I've always been near printing and ink. My father was a stereotyper for the Herald newspaper in Melbourne. According to family law, my grandfather worked for the Herald as well. I do not know that for sure, but he was described on the electoral rolls as a moulder, which effectively is what a stereotyper is. So I've always been there. When I was in short pants, we've been reminiscing a bit about Melbourne in the 50s and 60s and migration and so on at the end of the table here. I guess back then anybody who came in through the Jolimont railway yards and saw the Herald and Weekly Times building there in Flinders Street, quite possibly anybody who did that might have seen my dad or me up on the roof between those two masts having a cup of tea or something, because that's what you did. That was a factory in the middle of Melbourne, which probably is a different thing these days. You had it was a 4-storey building, paper store in the bottom, publishing room, then it would go up. 3rd floor was all what we call mahogany row and all the white collar people in ties, which included me at the time. And
smoking?
Sorry?
Smoking?
Absolutely. That's not a joke, actually. When we moved into a new building at the back, you literally had to take an axe to get to the door. The smoke was that thick. Everybody smoked and smoked a lot. So it was an industry thing. My father also died before he retired, and that was in part, we suspect, because not just his lifestyle, because he liked a smoke and a drink, but the atmosphere he worked in was very soaked in lead and other heavy metals. So these people really didn't have a chance in a way. It was an industrial thing that was just accepted at the time. So anyway, brief story there. When I was in short pants, my dad would take me into town when he collected his pay, which was real folding money. You'd go in and once a week and get it for your work. And I'd go in there, and so from a very young age I was in the Herald building, going up and down the lifts, in and out of the composing room, through the presses, everything else. So it was a familiar environment for me at that time. Later on I worked for companies including Visiboard, making cartons, making corrugated board, flexo printing, litho printing. Then I went back as a journalist working for the Herald. Later on, desktop publishing, brochures, marketing, but always ink and printing was somewhere very close by, even if I was not the tradesman. So I can't answer your tradesman questions quite often, but I can talk in broad brush, if that's okay. So as it says there, from hot metal to cold type and then on to digital, I've sort of worked in those environments all that time. And that's sort of setting the scene for you there. Yes, we're going to try and make it a quick history. Obviously somebody made imprints, handprints. We've all been through this with Indigenous people and cavemen back as far. We all made prints, then we started to put dyes and colours on things and make our mark on trees and caves and tools and so on. As we said, the early ones were just pictograms with depicting animals or scenes or humans. Spoken language was there, but it wasn't until about 3000 BC that we started the beginnings of making marks that represented sounds. And so we talk about the Middle East there, we talk about Egypt. It also cropped up in Mexico, which we do tend to forget about. South America and Asia a bit sometimes. In our histories, we do tend to be a bit European and Middle Eastern focused. But so the first alphabet with the Phoenicians, we say there, the Aramaic scripts, the Greek alphabets, thank you, the Greeks, And then we... It comes from the Greek words. So we ended up improving our methods a bit. We used, instead of just putting pieces of wood or bark or whatever, or clay, we used reeds and quills, and then we ended up ultimately with mechanised production. So I describe this as my MASH moment, the famous TV series. And Hawkeye is talking to a few people who are denigrating their North Korean enemies over the line, and Hawkeye's pointing out that these people were printing in movable type 1,000 years ago, so don't take them too lightly. And I often wondered about that, because I'd been brought up on the German Gutenberg story, and so I was curious, had to do a little bit of digging myself. And so we go back to this fella, and forgive my pronunciation, anybody, in any language, but Bi Sheng. And he was credited with Chinese movable type, but the Chinese language being what it was really symbols. It's not phonetic. And so for each expression you wanted to use, you had to have a character. And so that's really what he did, was invent a library of uniform characters that could be put together in a block, ink applied, and then put onto skin or paper or whatever. So that's why it goes back there, and obviously it spread from China to Korea down to Japan. And the Chinese exercises, I found out, believe it or not, there was one region in China where that old skill of carving the wooden symbols, of printing with them, lasted until the 1980s. But there were literally 7 people left on the planet who could do it. And the Chinese government stepped in and made it a cultural thing that needed to be preserved. So there are now museums, a couple of museums that specialise in this process, which obviously has been there for a couple of thousand years. So they're still doing that. Interestingly, the purpose of printed messages early on was when people started to move into cities, and so they had to actually give directions. They had to take inventories of what they had, where my house was, what was in my house, what was my property and not yours. So that was when the written thing started to finesse somewhat and focus up. So the Chinese was, oddly enough with this one, was about genealogy records. They were family records. And so the printing was actually focused on printing a family book. This was your forebears, this is where they came from, this is what they did. So let's then, so it didn't take off though, as we say here, because there were just too many individual characters. I stand corrected, anybody here, but I think what we've found here is that in a 20th century typewriter we have about 2,000 Chinese characters accessible, but 4,000 or more would be needed to produce a newspaper. So it really wasn't particularly practical in many ways to continue that character printing. So let's move forward a bit, a couple of steps there, just Korea, obviously it's spread there, and the oldest surviving printed book in metal type goes to Korea, 1377. So here we come to the man we talked about, Mr. Gutenberg, the man of the millennium, not the bloke in the bottom right corner, the bloke in the middle. And he was from Mainz in Germany, and anybody familiar with your geography, you've got the Main River running east-west through Frankfurt, and you've got the Rhine River basically running north-south from Switzerland out to the sea in the Netherlands. Mainz is at the junction of those two rivers. Further upstream towards Switzerland is the town of Strasbourg, which has been variously French and German over time. Gutenberg was an interesting fellow. He was a bit of an inventor. He was obviously a risk taker. He obviously had some business skills. He also had a few business issues. The records show that he borrowed some money and had some disputes with lenders at different times. It wasn't a family name. He changed that. The family name was Genfleisch, I think. But so this is Mainz. Mainz is actually a place I'd recommend anybody visit. It's lovely. The photo on the left there, these are figures from Carnival. And Carnival is really a celebration of when they kicked Napoleon out of the Rhineland. And so they put on silly costumes and party for about a month. But in the background there from the two figures, you'll see Gutenberg and the famous cathedral. And the cathedral was famous because, I guess, as the Roman Empire spread north, it met this barrier of the Rhine and the barrier of the German forests. And so basically anything sort of west of the Rhine and south of the Danube was civilised, and anywhere else there was inhabited by mad German tribes. So the geography's rather interesting, but Mainz was one of the centres of where the elector for the Holy Roman Empire resided. So Mainz was actually politically very, very important. It was almost the next step beyond Rome and the Pope. So obviously we'd been doing books and printing using scribes, handwriting with pens of various kinds for many hundreds of years, and so only certain people, the clergy and upper classes, could afford books and other printed documents. And so Gutenberg's invention of the printing press, that was why he was called the man of the millennium, why it was such a revolution that suddenly it became economic to print and print different words on different pages in different editions. So he has been attributed with inventing the first movable type printing press around 1440. We say around 1440 because he did a lot of work in Mainz, but he moved for whatever family reasons to Strasbourg, upriver, south of Mainz, and the suspicion is that with his financial backers, that's where he perfected his ideas. And then they came back to Mainz, where the idea was put into commercial practice. We do talk, he used oil-based prints, adjustable moulds, and metal type. I referenced my father's working environment earlier on, with a lot of lead in the environment, tin and antimony. Because it had a low melting point, it was durable and it made clear impressions. I mention Aachen as well because part of what Gutenberg did before he got involved in printing machines was actually, you could say, a little bit shonky. He used to sell mirrors that reflected the spirits back to people. And so he was sort of in the high-end tourist trinket business in Aachen, which was where Charlemagne and all those. Aachen is further north, west of Köln, yeah. So Aachen is actually a magnificent cathedral. The interior decor of Aachen Cathedral is really something different. And ultimately, Charlemagne and his offspring, their empire went down as far as into Italy. So they really covered a big chunk of Europe. It was important. So that's where we talk about there. So he worked and produced pilgrimage souvenirs. So people would go to the cathedral at Aachen and buy a spirit mirror while they were there from Gutenberg. But he was a craftsman, amongst other things. He was a craftsman. He could build stuff. So now he ended up doing Martin Luther's Bible. Any Lutherans present? Maybe not. But Luther was a monk who had issues with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church basically used to sell favours. If you had the money, you could buy yourself a sainthood. Luther thought this was right against the teachings of the Bible, and so his famous act was to put his proclamation nailed to the door in a town in eastern Germany called Wittenberg. And so he really sort of started a war against the Roman Catholic Church. And obviously all the church activities at the time were in Latin. One of the things Luther did, and he started a couple of decades before this, was to translate it into German. And he went to great trouble to make the German understandable to every man. So this was the first time that, if you like, the word of God had been given to the Germans in their own language. And this was something that Rome and the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire weren't too happy about. So a lot of it was done in secrecy. And it wasn't until, and so only, what do we say here? There are less than 50, I think 45 original copies of Gutenberg's Bible in existence. And if you can find one, you'll get it at least 40 million, possibly double that these days. There are various scraps around the world. Some places have got just one page or a piece of a page or something, but obviously not many survived. And we talk about here the cost of later on, when the printing presses had broken cover and were doing their work. He had the Bible printed in 1522, went to the Leipzig Book Fair. Leipzig, big city in eastern Germany, about an hour south of Berlin. Leipzig was at the crossroads of old European trading routes. And so 1,000 years ago, literally 1,000 years ago, Leipzig was given the rights to be a market city. And so the book fair and fairs of all kinds have actually been a feature of Leipzig commerce and society for 1,000 years.
Even today, Leipzig is one of the main places in Europe that manufactures printing presses.
No arguments. It's a wonderful city. My daughter used to live there. I spent a few years going back. In the local Saxonish dialect, it's more like Leipzig. Yeah. So there were, interestingly aside, there was a crime committed in Bavaria in Munich a few years ago, and they got the guy pretty quickly because they said it's a Saxon accent. So which is closer to Poland. It's closer to Polish in some pronunciations, but. So yeah, look at that comparison there. Once a copy of that cost 1.5 guildens, and it was the comparison previously of buying an S-Class Mercedes, and then suddenly you could buy a fridge. It is that sort of revolution in economy of publishing it. Caxton crops up in the history. He didn't invent it. He hooked up later on with. He saw what Gutenberg was doing. He was actually in Bruges, in Belgium. Brugge? Anybody with a Bruges? Okay, I've been there. It's lovely. It's in the swamps and the canals and everything, like the movie. He was in Bruges. His family were in textiles and lace. But he woke up to what was going on with Gutenberg, and he basically brought the idea of the printing press from Germany to England. So that was where Caxton fitted in. So over the next few hundred years, we've really just got a story of mechanisation. We've got the idea of movable type. how are we going to do it? We do it in different ways with different machines. So it's the same idea, but just with different processes and different mechanisms. And so a couple are listed there: rotary printing presses, rotary drum printing, early 1800s, Hoe and his rotary press. In newspapers in the first half of the 1900s, you would have Hoe presses or Goss presses. They were the brands that were still in use in newspapers around the world. So the idea...
Is that set with individual letters or lines of letters?
well, we'll look at this little bit. And sort of in the late 1800s, Mergenthaler was the guy who was credited with coming up with the idea of, it was the linotype machine, line of type. And so they would create that on a keyboard, and that would cast a letter. And this is where we're getting to where Max and I were talking last week. That would cast a letter, which would be wrong reading. It had to be mirror image. And then you would cast something from that onto something else, and the printing plate would be poured into that. So, but Mergenthaler is the guy. Mergenthaler's name has been associated with it for 150 years. Linotype's machine. There were a couple of other makes. There's actually pages and pages and pages of stuff online about the arguments about patents, which we won't bore ourselves with here. If you're into patents and legal arguments about why your machine is different to that one, just Google up Mergenthaler and linotype and we'll come and get you next week, because there's plenty of it. I have got some stuff here. Now, the reason when we type letters in metal to print with, the very fact that it's out of that metal and that combination of lead, tin and antimony, we do it because it's easy to melt. It's got a low melting point, but it gives you a sharp impression. The fact that it's remelted is why there's very little of it left. As a kid, I used to come home with slugs, what we called slugs of linotype. I'd bring them home and play with them and make stamps and pretend to make newspapers. I have some here. By all means, have a look. This is the sort of thing, A's, sorry, I do need these back because they're not mine, they're a friend of mine who's, these ones were created more for foil printing, or gold printing, sort of, but the idea is there. You see a slug of a letter. Now, I also have uncovered some old photographs, which you might want to share. This, I do believe, is the Melbourne Herald foundry. This is where my father worked. I don't see him in any of these photos, but if I can explain the process first, if we cast a line of type, let's say you have a poem, let's just imagine a poem, simple poem, 10 lines. So you cast that in 10 lines of type. It then gets put into a frame, a flat frame, and it's centered and jammed up tight. So everything's fixed. It's wrong reading, okay? It's backwards. On top of that, you make an imprint from it. Now here we have a page that, being the hoarder that I am, from an early edition of the Melbourne Herald, and this is that's half of a broadsheet. That's not. Yeah. Now this is, so what we do when we've got the stuff in the frame, it's all was wrong reading, but you've impressed this in. Now my dad used to refer to this as a flong. I don't know how true that is. A flong, F-L-O-N-G. Piece of cardboard to me. but it's obviously a special. It's obviously a special sort of board that takes the imprint, and so that is right reading. Correct?
Pretty expensive material. That antimony is one of the rarest metals on this planet.
But as I said, it's remelted, so it's recovered.
It's very hard.
Yes, it gives the hardness. Lead is soft, low melting point. Antimony gives it the hardness and the sharpness.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. And so this one, as you have a look, that's... now what you do with that, you could do it for us. Roll it round in a semicircle. Just imagine it's going round a drum. Other way. Yep. Okay. So what you do is put that into a casting machine, into a mould. That becomes the mould. You pour liquid metal, hot metal, into that, and it takes that shape, right? So it's semicircular. So then that plate is wrong reading. Now, if you have a look at these photos, you will see an image of the plate that's been produced out of that. So they've cast that. These are not all showing the same thing, but this is the atmosphere that these guys worked in.
Pour the maple onto this.
Yeah, it's curved, and a shield goes round, and that becomes the mould that you pour the metal into. Yes.
Sharp and it doesn't burn. It doesn't get burned.
No. So we've really gone from this to that and to a metal plate, and of course, because they were the metal plates in hot metal, they were melted down again, so they don't survive. So we don't have them. Sorry to show you. There may be a couple in museums somewhere, I don't know, but
There might have been one down the road actually. P&P had a printing.
well, that started out, we talk here about rotogravure, you'll see in this list. That was HGP, Herald Gravure Printers. And that was a special division that used to do the high quality work that the letterpress. I said, I'm not a printer. You're welcome to come and fill in the rest.
No, I'm not a printer, but
Yep.
I've done a lot of work with printers.
Yep.
P&P in particular.
Yep.
And,
Well, that was the old Herald Gravure printers, and that was actually up there, right up there on quality at the time when it came in. So what we're talking about here are these different sorts of rotary printing. When I was in the packaging industry, for example, we used rubber stereos. And so we would have a flat piece of rubber. This is often used for cardboard boxes, say corrugated boxes. And on the side, you just wanted something pretty crude to say Rosella tomato sauce in block letters, 10 bottles, 500 mils or whatever. And so you would come up with a flexo, which was really just a rubber mat, and on that rubber mat you really put rubber letters onto that mat. And rather than go through the process with the flong, basically that was put onto a drum, that was inked as it went round, the cardboard went round it, and it rolled over the flat cardboard and imprinted Rosella tomato sauce bottles on the side. So that was a stereo, again, called stereo, and that was really a simple letterpress process. It was really an automated version of what they were doing 1,000 years ago. So very simple in concept, just the execution of the machines was so much better. When we got to offset litho, and again I was associated with that through companies like Visiboard, where we were doing offset printing, 4-colour, 5-colour process. That's another one again where you sort of create a printing plate and the ink adheres to certain parts of the plate and not others, but that imprint is put onto a blanket. The blanket puts it on a roller, the roller puts it on the paper. So, and you could work at very high speeds and with very great accuracy. So you got very high quality printing, imagery. At the time, I'm talking about the 1970s, what we were doing was making cartons. So you would have, say, a bit of box for, say, consumer goods, a toaster. The box would have on the outside a very attractive toaster in a kitchen setting, so you could put a nice photo there, would tell you what was in the box. It became a sales tool. But how do you do that? Well, what we did back then was somewhat different, but part of the corrugated box process is called single face, and that's where you've got one layer of paper and one layer of corrugations on the top. That's created by a fluted roller, paper going over the fluted roller with steam. Paper forms the crinkles, if you want, and then that goes through a process where there's glue or starch put on the top of the crinkles, for want of a better word, the flutes, and the other piece of paper is brought together with it, and between heat and pressure it's set. So that gives you what's called single face, which is really one piece of straight paper and one piece of corrugation through it. Then what we used to do then was print a high quality piece of offset printing and laminate that. So we would then put glue again on the top, on the remaining tops of the flutes, press that offset page onto it, and then you would use a die cutter, either a flat press or a rotary press, to stamp out a box, which would be then glued or assembled in some other way. But you would end up with the bulk of it being a cardboard box, but the outside being a really pretty sales presentation. So you could use high quality colour on the outside, low quality box on the inside. So that's how we used to do those. But that was actually a process that was superseded later on, but for that time it was ahead of the game. So we talk here about rotogravure, which our friend recognised used to happen down the road in Burwood Road, about where Bunnings is, if I remember rightly.
Correct.
Yep. And so in rotogravure and gravure printing, you've really got little indents in the plate, and each indent takes a different colour ink. And basically the way the indents are arranged, the paper is covered in different ink, and the arrangement, when you see it en masse, it creates a photo or the printing that you need. So gravure printing, that was gravure. Flexography was really what I talked about with the other one. So again, we...
Did it go through in one go, or is it one go per colour?
No, you'd have three sets. No, you would have a set for each colour, so the machine would be like in a 4-colour process offset machine. You would have the process colours, forgive me, into the bag of tricks somewhere. Colours aren't colours. I think this is an old set, but colours are actually standards. Familiar? So you would say you want PMS this, which is so much of process blue, so much of cyan blue, so much of process yellow, so much of sorry, the red one, the pink, magenta, correct, and black. So you would, between those 4 colours, you would actually make up those, whatever you wanted. This, yeah.
So
Yes.
The colours used to go through different sections.
Yes. So one plate on a 4-colour process machine, one would print the yellow, one would print the red, one would print the blue, one would print the black. When it came out the end, it was complete. So obviously we have, this might intrigue you whether you've seen that as well out of the arc, but these were it's basically a little handbook to teach you all of this. The different processes, what you're supposed to do, different point sizes, that's the colours, the processes, there's the gospel.
All those point sizes we use today in Microsoft Word. Still.
the concept is still there. One that's gone out of fashion though. I have a ruler which will measure something for me in m's, not centimetres. The old printer's measure was an M, EM. When you've got a Scrabble problem, m's. So you'll find m's on that ruler as one of the measurements. That was an old printer's ruler.
Does it have to be an M of a particular typeface and a particular size?
No, an M is a fixed. No, I don't think it was related to point size. A column might be a column of type in the old newspapers would possibly be, say, 15 m's wide or something of that nature. So here we have the simple idea on the bottom here on the left. Basically, you've got your type down there with your imagery, and wrong way round. You put your paper on it and ink the roller, or ink it. Put your paper on it, the roller comes over and impresses it. The linotypes, there's a typical linotype department from, certainly I grew up with this sort of stuff. I don't know where that one was. I do apologise. I've pinched images from all over the shop. But that on the left is the linotype keyboard. That's what the operator did. And they used to have a corner of the publishing room. So they're sitting there churning out lines of type. And then little boxes, or what we call galleys of that type, would be taken over to the composers. The composers were the guys who actually put it into the frames and set it up, jammed it up tight, made sure everything was spaced correctly, and so on, before we made the flong. So, just again, visuals. Guy on the right sort of basically checking things. He was usually the sort of bloke who could read that backwards. That was a skill he developed, wrong reading type. So he could tell if there was an issue. One little aside there, if for example, you had an error that you wanted to fix in the type, you usually didn't bother going to the trouble of trying to make up the whole page again. You used to call what was called bat it. You would just basically get a little metal tool and wipe off that letter. So if you'd misspelled somebody's name, you'd say it was Mr. Gregovich and he had 2 C's in the production. Well, we'd just get rid of the second C by just scraping it off so it wouldn't go into the process. And so we'd bat that off. Very simple, but so much stuff used to go like that. And somebody might read their newspaper and say, oh, there's 2, isn't that space a bit wider than normal? And you noticed, somebody else didn't. So then we evolved onto typewriters. I guess, I don't know how many of you young and beautiful people use typewriters. I used one for many years. Basically, the first format used to be the one on the top right, where you had imprints of letters which would go onto a tape and either imprint tape onto the paper or through something. Then we evolved to speedier ones. The one on the bottom right's the golf ball, and the one on the bottom left's called the daisy wheel. In my own personal experience, I used to, well, a lot of people who use typewriters used to actually develop a huge love for particular typewriters, the feel of the keys, the noise it made, how smoothly the carriage was returned for the next line. Olivetti, Triumph, Hermes, they're all names that come back to people, and they'll remember. The people who use them all the time would remember them. Personally, I thought I used to like using the golf ball. To me, the daisy wheel was always, there was too much of delay while it rotated the wheel to the right character and before it imprinted it. So dot matrix, I think anybody here remember dot matrix printers in the office? Noisy, slow, illegible, prone to blockage. Had to have the right size paper with the holes on the feed to go through. But, you know, And as we say there, each dot out of the matrix, if you imagine, say the Channel 9 logo, which has got 3 dots on it, you'd make any number you wanted, a 1 or a 0 or a 7 out of those dots in the matrix. And each of the dots would be pushed by a little electric solenoid or charge would push that out at the time. Thermal printers, I actually had one of those. For me, it was probably my first computer. Useless piece of junk. What I liked about it was that the last 20 characters that you did, before it actually put them on the thermal paper, it would show them up in a window. So in theory, you had opportunity to correct as you went along, and you would delete that character before it got onto the thermal head.
Supermarkets still use them.
Do they really?
Yes, thermal paper.
Oh, the thermal paper, yes, is in use, but this concept of correcting it as it goes across. Yeah, the thermal paper, of course, we all know, leave it in your pocket and it's gone in 6 months, yeah. Laser printing, we're getting into the techie area where I'm not so strong. I think I've tried to talk about some atmospherics from the 50s through to the 80s. But laser printing, electrostatics, we're starting to get see where mechanics meets chemistry meets physics there to actually put the characters on the page. So cold type, that was an intermediate stage. Up until about 1982, the Herald in Melbourne was using hot metal. Then we progressed to what was called cold type, and we were producing really plastic plates. So you didn't have to go through that metal casting process. It really put the image onto a plastic plate, and then we went to digital printing where there's not even a plate, in effect. Would have been probably through the mid-80s to late 80s, I think. It was sort of intermediate between hot metal and true digital, and so on. It was. Sorry, is that where we're at? I think I've got there as far as I am. So, so I've got that. Max was a bit astonished at this. If we go back to Mr. Gutenberg, this is a family issue. There are 2 volumes of this. That is an exact facsimile of Mr. Gutenberg's Bible from the 1450s. If anybody would like to have a quick look, you're not going to get a lot from it. No, you could get one online from Mainz, so they're probably now this one, somebody's going to have to guard with their life. This is really a souvenir from Mainz. But let's talk about Mr. Gutenberg. That's his Bible. That's the smallest Bible.
Oh my lord.
And it's teeny, 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 but it's real. I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask. So it's. I have a daughter who literally writes the Bible on the top of a pin. I think she probably had it. But no, it is a tourist thing from Mainz, but it is a true example of what is capable in printing now. So we've really gone from carving, if you like, spears and starfish in clay to being able to actually print words. I honestly don't know. I honestly do not know. So for anybody who wants this as well, this is another illustration. Thank you very much. This is another. The Herald and Weekly Times Limited as a company used to produce a house newsletter called House News. Of no interest to anybody who didn't work there, unless you want to go back and look at history. This is one that I happen to keep. Don't ask me why. But it's the story of the Herald's printing and there's a picture there of the printing presses with those curved cast plates on the press. And the stream of paper, a constant stream of paper going through, which is called a web. You can have page printers or you can have web printers. And there was absolutely nothing quite like about 2 in the afternoon when publishing would start up and the presses would roll up and the whole 4-storey building would almost lift off its foundations as the presses geared up and tons of metal went round and round and round at very high speed and paper got fed into it. The guys on the forklifts were flat out keeping paper reels, 1-ton paper reels up to it. It would come off the end, it would be cut, folded, put together, bundled and come down chutes to what was at the time a famous fleet of International Harvester trucks which would race out all over metropolitan Melbourne delivering the first edition of the Herald. Sorry? No, and hit the street, it usually started to hit the streets, the Herald would hit the streets being the evening paper. The Herald would start hitting the streets about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then there would possibly, if depending on what was happening in the news, Prime Minister dies, Prime Minister resurrected, you would have a second edition come out and the second edition would come out.
I remember I said that night one of the highlights was to race down to station.
Oops.
So Saturday Age, straight off the
Yes.
at midnight,
Yes.
or just after midnight.
For the job ads and the real estate ads and the car ads. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So we'd be the first to get people up.
The colour, I think in the original ones, the colour was actually done afterwards by hand. So they printed the black and then the artist would do the, I've forgotten the name for it now, they would make it pretty. So that was still done by hand, but the words were all laid down. Yeah. So for me, that's what I've shared with you tonight. I'm not a printer. I've just really tried to brush over a couple of thousand years of history and tried to share some experiences, the personal experiences which really went from, say, the 1950s up until the 1980s in printing and allied industries, certainly in Melbourne and in Australia broadly. We still had a long history of it. Maryborough in regional Victoria is still one of the few, I think, high quality book printers. Book publishing in Maryborough became quite a big industry for the town, still is, although books have fallen out of favour somewhat. And as we know, newspapers circulations have gone downhill, so yes, the quantity and so on of it, and obviously when the movement to colour, when everybody expected colour, after colour TV, well, you couldn't just have a black and white newspaper, could you? It had to come through and compete. Personally, I'm still involved as a writer in magazines. Our magazines are small and niche. I work for horticulture, landscape design, things like that. Our circulations are extremely small, embarrassingly small, but a lot of people in these niche sectors still like to have something in their hands that they can put on the lunch table, pass to a friend and say, look at this, have you seen that? What do you think of that? So in those small niche markets,
I think there's been some resurrection of magazines.
in the niche, yes, in the niche sector, but then some others have fallen by the wayside. I had a good friend, and I used to write for a magazine, Hydroponics was another one of my interests. His magazine ultimately went full digital, but in the USA, I think was one of his last remaining markets. The USA used to have 50 states and there used to be about a hydroponic magazine in about 30 of them. They've all gone. And I think even the digital one, I'm not even sure it's still produced as a digital edition. The economics are just not there. So the economics of printing, let's go through from scratching your own thing on a clay block to Mr. Gutenberg to laser printers and digital printing. The economics have really, the productivity has just gone through the roof, but the economics are still not there for all applications, and yet your cornflakes still come in a box. Your letter from the council with your rates notice is still usually arriving in a letter and an envelope. Your magazines for various instructions and interests. My wife's seed catalogue from Tesla's, it still comes in beautiful colour on paper. So it's a bit like money. I do too. I'm a sucker for an Aldi catalogue, but that sort of thing, whether it's a catalogue or something else, many people still like to see that physical form. So there are people that do it, Max, so you know that. Yeah. So I'm sorry, that's me for tonight. I hope I haven't bored you too much. And please, if there's any other questions or gaps, please just go and search it. It's fun.